As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. How can we come together? How can we work together to be able to create this better security? Because these problems are so much larger than just one country getting after some of these things. And it is about finding the agency and working to collectively to be able to improve the security, not just in our own countries, but in the regions that we find ourselves. And I think that the readers will value that approach that we take in the book to help them see that.
Aloha and welcome to this special episode of Dialogue. I am Shyam Tekwani, joined by Lami Kim, my colleague, and today we are excited to turn the spotlight on an incredible milestone for the Daniel K. Inouye Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies, the release of our book, The Indo-Pacific Mosaic, Comprehensive Security Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. As chapter authors and repeated guests on Dialogue, both Lami and I have had the privilege of contributing to this landmark book. Edited by our host, Dr. James Minnick, the Indo-Pacific Mosaic brings together the insights of 27 distinguished experts to explore the dynamic and complex security landscape of the Indo-Pacific region. Now, this book isn't just a celebration of the center's 30th anniversary. It's importantly a testament to the collaborative spirit and forward-thinking solutions that the center has fostered over 3 decades.
That's right, Shyam. The title Indo-Pacific Mosaic is particularly fitting. It reflects the region's incredible diversity with its unique blend of cultures, economies, and strategic priorities, all interconnected in ways that both demand both nuanced understanding and cooperative solutions. The book delves into critical issues like great power competition, maritime disputes, hybrid warfare, the roles of key regional actors such as ASEAN, India, and South Korea. And James has done an outstanding job curating and editing this volume, which is not an easy task at all. It's more than just an academic resource. It's a call to action for policymakers, scholars, and practitioners to address the region's evolving challenges with innovation and collaboration.
Well, today we have the unique opportunity to turn the tables on our host, James Minnick, as we interview him about the making of this book, its key themes, and its potential impact on the Indo-Pacific and beyond. So what we'll do is we'll dive into his vision for the volume, the process of bringing together such a diverse group of experts, 27, and how the Indo-Pacific Mosaic aligns with the center's mission of fostering dialogue and cooperation.
We're honored to be part of this discussion and to share this moment with you. So without further ado, let's begin as we typically do. Dr. James Minnick, please tell your story.
Well, before I tell my story, I need to at least express my gratitude or something, because Shyam, you needled me often to come on here and to do this sit down to talk about the book.
Well, it's brought us here the 4th time.
It brought you, each of you here the 4th time. So actually, I'm excited for this opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about this. But let me start, as Lami asked, and give you just a little bit of insight of myself. So I've been working in the Indo-Pacific region going on 4.5 decades. First is in the military, and then the latter part as an academic. In 1982, as a soldier, I deployed to Korea and was there for a year. But this began a beginning of a really long 15-year engagement for me on the Korean Peninsula. During the time I was there, I began in tactical units and then went to operational and strategic looking units. But I also had the opportunity to enroll in at Sogong University, their Korean language program. Was there for 18 months. was a graduate of the Korean Army Staff College, and then in 2009 even graduated the National Defense University. Spent a year there. In between those time there, I also though spent time in South Asia. I spent a year in Afghanistan, and then from the National Capital Region spent let me see, 2011, 12, and 13. So I was 2010 in Afghanistan, 11, 12, and 13, back and forth. And so that and many other different experiences, I did a advanced degrees, regional studies, East Asia from Harvard, and then did a doctorate from USC in California. Had the opportunity, next year I'll have been here for 10 years. I know for you, Sham, that sounds like a short period of time because you've been here so much longer, but then maybe for Lami, it sounds like a long time. But I'll have been here for 10 years, really engaged in this region, looking at these issues. And so it has really been professionally rewarding. So, 10 years from now, when you talk to me, I hope to still be here, telling stories just a little bit 10 years longer, but that's a little bit about me.
Well, thanks so much, James. And you've packed in quite a lot in the short life so far that you've had. I wish you a longer one. And I don't think we'll wait for 10 years. I hope to be back here again next year with your next book.
Good.
If that comes apart. But let's get the conversation started.
Yeah.
Ken. So I think our viewers would be really interested in understanding what the inspiration was behind this book, this volume. But first off, congratulations.
Thank you.
On the release of this incredible book, which marks the 30th anniversary of the center. So tell us about the center. Give us some context and what inspired this book itself and what it aims to achieve in addressing these challenges.
Okay, let me start with just a little bit about the center for context. So it's celebrating it this year, its 30th anniversary. So in 1995, the center stood up as the second regional center in the Department of Defense, working for the Office of Policy, right? USDP. It is focused, like the other centers, on trying to advance security cooperation, in this case here in the region, the Indo-Pacific, but doing that through executive education. And so in, the fall of 23, I was approached and asked if I would consider editing a volume to recognize, in celebration and recognition of the 30th anniversary, which is, of course, this year. Was excited to do that. And we thought about the focus of the book, and knowing that, there's a need to be able to better understand and and capture the evolving security landscape here in the region that I think is pronounced a bit by the disruptions, divisions, and the competition, which is escalating here. And so that kind of is what got us going. The book actually went online the 17th of January. So posted January 17th online. We've been advertising about that. Viewers, many of them are no doubt have probably gone to it, but they can find it dkiapcs.edu and then /Mosaic, short title for the book. It'll be in print probably in the next 30 days and available, and we'll distribute it to libraries and those of interest. But that's kind of how we got going.
Well, then let's talk about framing the Indo-Pacific challenges. As you briefly mentioned, this region faces a lot of security challenges. And you wrote the first chapter, the introductory chapter, Finding Security in the Indo-Pacific. So could you tell us a little bit about how you address those challenges in this chapter and how you frame them?
Yeah. So I guess we begin in trying to frame and understand or putting forward this concept that this region is a mosaic, this, distinct but interconnected pieces that come together to shape the totality of what's happening out here. When we think about well, I guess when I was writing the first chapter, I kind of knew that it needed to be the foundation for the book, and kind of set all the chapters in place. And so we also, take an effort to, when we consider security in this book, we look at it beyond just this traditional security, and try to open that, to understand its more complex nature. The book is its structure it can be found in 4 parts. There's 4 sections to the book. So after the introductory chapter on finding security in the Indo-Pacific, we then go into disruptions and uncertainties in the Indo-Pacific. And in each chapter, each section, there's about six chapters in each one. In the second one, then we look at navigating great power competition. Then we look at this in the third part, we look at the imperative for cooperation. And then we finalize the book looking at building on resilience and security in the Indo-Pacific. And that's kind of how it structures out, beginning with the first chapter on finding security in the Indo-Pacific.
So if I may take the conversation slightly different, and this is about not just the process of putting the book together, curating expert voices, and when you bring together 27 experts to contribute diverse perspectives, which is required, it requires a deliberate editorial approach. I'm just curious to know, it's difficult doing that, dealing with sometimes fragile egos, sometimes content which is really not up to the par, and so on. So how did you ensure the depth and coherence across such a wide range of topics? I've had a chance to read it since its publication, and I think for me the key thing that struck to me is the depth and coherence that is clearly visible in the book.
Speaking of depth, it's just shy of 700 pages, and so that's fairly large. It's nearly twice the size as the book we did 5 years earlier for the 25th anniversary. Not that we were, seeking a page count as a metric for how the book would be presented, or its quality.
You still fall short of Tolstoy's War and Peace.
It is. But that wasn't because we didn't try. There are 25 chapters, but had nothing fallen through. There have been over 35 chapters. I mean, we started off in fall of 23 and put out a call for papers, and received from throughout the community proposals on chapters. And so we began the process of cultivating those and trying to shape it into, so that it wasn't a loosely tied connection of just different chapters, but as I kind of elucidated in my last comment about how we try to tie all this together. And so we go through that process, and the process went back and forth many times. I mean, both of you can attest. Sham, you contributed 2 chapters, and Lami one herself. And so this went over time, and it was a wonderful experience, actually, to work with the chapter authors and to help shape its content as it was going to fit in the book, and this iterative back and forth. But then there was also this necessity to ensure that we had the scope of experience that ranged throughout the region. This book covers all the subregions, and its authors come from all the subregions. Deep experience, which brings the authenticity you want and the expertise when you're reading it. I know that some 15,000 people who've come through our door that are alumni of our programs respect the neutral tone that we take to try to help educate and understand of the region. And that's what this book does as well, right? And it's important that the voices are trusted, and they are. And so, what a unique opportunity it was for me to be able to work with authors to be able to pull all this together. So thanks for asking that question.
Yeah. So now let's get into the real substance of the book and talk about urgent challenges and solutions. Of course, this 27 chapters of the book covers a lot of different issues, but please tell us about the most urgent security challenges in the region and some innovative solutions that the book proposes.
Yeah, so challenges and solutions. Deliberately, the book did not try to look at a single threat or a single issue and delve deeply into that one topic. That's not what we did do. As I mentioned before, it's framed as we consider the disruptions, the divisions, and the competitions that are occurring here in the region. But we also, that crosses through as we think about how we more deeply understand these disruptions. So in part one, we talk about the disruptions and the uncertainties. And as we look at this, I mean, there are 6 chapters that broadly at first begin to consider these issues. We're looking at the globalization and its issues and its impact on security. We're looking at the rise, the shifting of powers, of great powers here in the region. The influence that, the effect that technological, emerging technology has here in the region, how it's shaping things, how resource competition, how terrorism, how these very broad issues are coming together to deeply influence the area. When we start thinking about great power competition, number one, we try not to frame this is a region which is wholly defined by great power competition, but rather it is because of great power competition, the states within have to navigate this. They have to find, with their own voice, they have to try to put forward their own agendas. And this is a complex issue. And so when we're looking at navigating great power competition, this is kind of how we're thinking of that. In fact, I think both of your 3 chapters are in that portion of the book, and we're describing how this all looks. In fact, maybe I'll just take a pause here for a second and give you a chance. Sham, you wrote about 2 of those chapters. You wrote about India's rise and how that affects the region, but you also wrote about the strategic, the smallness of South Asian states and how they're leveraging. Maybe just take a couple minutes and share what your thoughts were on when you were writing those chapters.
Yeah, I'll definitely like to highlight the strategic smallness of the states in South Asia, what some of them refer to as smaller states or smaller neighbors. And one of the things that we have been seeing in the region before this business of strategic competition came into play was the fact that it appeared to an observer that all these small states had no agency.
Yeah.
They were at the mercy of a bigger neighbor. And one of the nice things about strategic competition is suddenly all these smaller states found that they could turn to somebody else. They were not going to be solely dependent on one large neighbor. And it set me thinking, and it's not that they want to choose this or that, it's the force of circumstances that push them towards side A or side B. In this case, it's China or India. It just struck me that it might do them good if they decided to band together and found, this strength in numbers, a collective voice. Given that the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, or SARC, as it is more commonly known, is it's moribund. It's as good as having one foot in its grave. Nothing much is happening because of the dynamic of 2 nuclear-powered states. So, and so I have a co-author, Soumya Sampath. We discussed this back and forth, and we figured that it was about time that these smaller states thought about getting together, minus India and Pakistan, and build a kind of a regional collective, which would give them, which would actually pronounce their agency and give them that kind of strategic autonomy, which countries like India are basically clamoring for.
We talk often in the book about this agency that states are finding. Your example made me think of an excellent chapter on the Pacific Islands in the same section that shows how these states have leverage because of great power competition to seek greater things that they can pull from based on their interests because of the competition that's going on and the interest that's being shown in their areas. Lami and I have, of course, you're just on the show. We talked a little bit about this, but I mean, your chapter on South Korea is it's thinking about looking beyond ambiguity, which it has often tried to kind of play this middle road, and how very clearly they were coming forth with a very U.S. Centric position. But your chapter also very insightful. Thoughts or any comments?
Yeah, sure. So my chapter talks about how South Korea can implement the Indo-Pacific strategy that President Yoon Suk-yeol announced about 2 years ago. So he announced this strategy, Indo-Pacific strategy, that very closely aligns with the US's Indo-Pacific strategy, and laying out sort of similar goals like the stability in the Taiwan Strait and maritime security and rule-based international order. But because this strategy was so new, the South Korean government was still trying to figure out how to implement that. And I try to suggest some ways for South Korea to do it. One example is that the South Korea can be a key player in enhancing the regional security capabilities by, for example, providing weapons to Southeast Asian countries and other developing countries, and providing them with some training, some sort of software, as well as hardware support. Another thing that I talk about among many is that South Korea can also thwart China's efforts to dominate the critical infrastructure market, the 5G infrastructure market, and the nuclear power plants, because South Korea also has the capabilities to provide those things to the countries in the region. Although President Yoon Suk-yeol has been impeached and is likely to be removed, however, I mean, still, I think that these insights are relevant because whoever becomes the president in the next later this year, still, South Korea's influence in the region will remain important, and there are a lot of gaps to fill for South Korea.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I would note that in your chapters, but in all the chapters, they're very solutions oriented, seeking to provide these pragmatic issue-based solutions that help practitioners think about how to get after these challenges that are raised. So it's not just enough. We didn't want that to be the case where we just, here's the problem, boy, do we got a problem. But what might we do as we think about this problem? And every one of the chapters gets into that. The third section, when we're talking about this imperative for cooperation, we really delve into those chapters about cooperative efforts that can be undertaken. And there are 5 chapters in that third section that get after that. The fourth chapter, there's 7 chapters. The fourth section, there's 7 chapters in there, and this one is really looking at the resiliency that's needed to counter, to mitigate these challenges which are brought over, and some of them are really significant ones. Societal resilience by Beth Kuntz was a deep think on the challenges societies are having presently and how they need to be more resilient, and many more. But yeah, thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, my next one was going to focus on agency and collaboration. So the book emphasizes agency, and we just spoke about agency right now, and collaboration among the regional actors. My question in that connection would be, how do you envision this approach reshaping policy discussion in the Indo-Pacific?
I think I want to foot stomp something I just said. And that is, I think that we want this book, the Indo-Pacific Mosaic, to shift the policy discussion on pragmatic, issue-based solutions to our problems, rather than just this binary power struggle that we tend to want to look at the region through. Good, bad, weak, strong, and how to be able to recognize this need to find solutions. And so that was a critical focus of what this book is intended to do. No chapter lays out and says, we've got a problem, without also saying, and here are some things that we recommend be done about this to improve the security. There's a tribute to the front of the book to, that layout is for better security. And that's really, what the book is thinking about, is how do we create this better security here in the region? Yeah.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, and then you actually contributed to 2 more chapters in addition to the first chapter, right?
Yeah.
And then they are on leadership on positive peace
Yeah.
and security framing.
That's right.
So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, it was really enjoyable to, I enjoy writing. I have written other books and other chapters, and I know, Lami, you're a big writer, and I know, Sham, you're working on a book right now. We talked about it, highlighted it in one of the earlier chapters. And so it's something that is not viewed as a chore, but something which is, cathartic and all, you can pull these thoughts out onto a piece of paper. And so the chapter on leadership for positive peace, this is in the section that is looking at offering, it is not, so that chapter specifically is, which I co-wrote with my colleague, Roxanne Turner. Maybe I should just take a second and mention her. She's been at the center a few times, was here as an intern, and then was my research fellow, and spent a year here. And she went into Kosovo, and she did on-the-ground research looking into one of the case studies in that chapter, which looks at 2 case studies. The first one considering the effort that was undertaken by former President Atatürk Yayaga, who was Kosovo's first female president, and you may say it's a long way away. Interesting story about her is in 2008, when Kosovo declared its independence, she came here and she was a fellow in one of our courses, and she was the security forces and police forces. And so this is in 2008, and she then just 3 years later, in 2011, is elected after a bit of a tumultuous time, and rises to be the country's president. And she'll serve out, actually, first president to serve out her 5-year term. And this comes on the heel of, a very difficult post-conflict period for the country. And she's, with that, how does she, with this empathetic, inclusive leadership, how does she help bring this nation forward to be able to heal and to succeed in a time which is extremely uncertain for the nation? We also look at former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand and the many crises, including COVID and the Christchurch massacre. Yeah, you remember that, the White Island eruption, and just crisis after crisis, and how leaders how leadership matters. It is extremely important in addressing these security issues that we're talking about. Leadership matters. And so that's what that chapter kind of gets after and kind of uses the framework of positive peace to do that. The other one is we're thinking about security analysis and understanding this more comprehensive view of understanding conflict and crises through the people who live, in these areas. I've often have heard people say, if we just get people out of the way, boy, we could take care of the security problem. People are not the problem; they're the priority for which we're providing security, and understanding it through that frame can help produce this this better security. And so we get after that as well. Thanks for asking.
I know you alluded to something, but I just made a note. I was going to ask you about regional cooperation in action. And I know there are some case studies strewn throughout the book, highlighting examples of successful collaboration and cooperation among Indo-Pacific nations. The question for you will be, what lessons can policymakers draw from these examples that we have laid out in the book to foster greater regional cooperation?
There's over a dozen case studies throughout the book that are pulled in there. I mean, I just listed two of them, right? With Yayaga and Ardern, and talking about their examples in leadership. But there's well over a dozen case studies that are intended to help people see these challenges and think about how they may be addressed. Annie Barlow did a chapter on sea slavery, this forced labor, which is a just horrific problem that so many of the countries in the region are dealing with. And she puts forward some really thoughtful and pragmatic approaches to try to address this. Many episodes ago, I had her as a guest in here, and she spoke about that. And this fishing for, I think it was titled something like "Fishing for Security from Sea Slavery" was the title of that episode. And a lot of that helped her in shaping and thinking about the chapter she wrote. But it's extremely helpful as we think about this regional cooperation. How can we come together? How can we work together to be able to create this better security? Because these problems are so much larger than just one country getting after some of these things. And it is about finding the agency and working collectively to be able to improve the security, not just in our own countries, but in the regions that we find ourselves. And I think that the readers will value that approach that we take in the book to help them see that.
Great, James. I think perhaps this is going to be our last question before we get to the audience questions. So this volume offers a lot of insights, timely and invaluable insights. So what role do you hope this book to play in shaping scholarly and policy discussions?
Yeah. Well, first off, we're promoting and sending it out, and have been doing this more in earnest since it was released online, but began before that. And we will do other efforts to try to share the word, because we believe that it has very appropriate, very pertinent approaches to the challenges that are being faced. One can argue that is, in fact, the reason that we began this program of dialogue that's been going on now since the fall of 2023, for this exact same purpose, to help be a voice that is respected and valued, and seen as neutral, and trying to help advance the real challenges that exist. And so we'll continue to through this year as well. We'll continue to highlight a number of the chapters through episodes on dialogue. I alluded to some we've done. We've done several already, but we've got many more we want to do. We had Ethan here speaking about shared water, shared futures, and that's one of the really important chapters in the book that is asking us to. In fact, Sham, you have a little bit of recent history in this, understanding the importance of this critical resource and how the scarcity of resources really drive this insecurity in the regions and whatnot. And so we think that I really do believe that we will have a contributing voice in this. One of the authors, Scott McDonald, who was a military faculty here, went off after retiring, got his PhD, and is now teaching at a university, is presently using chapters from this book in this semester to be able to help. Yeah, right. And so it's not even in print yet, and he was real deliberate about wanting to pull on some of these chapters. Again, somebody who knows the quality of the work that we do out here. Scott's chapter on ASEAN moving from this more of a consensus base to a very deliberate leadership role here in the region, and its importance of that is a strong piece. I commend him for writing it, and now sharing that with his students, as well as he's looking at Rochelle Rodriguez's piece that she did on navigating the COFA agreement as it looks at the Pacific Islands and the spatial geopolitics of all of that. And another fantastic piece. I could go on and on. There are, when I think about Pete Heyman, he ambassador that served the United States government in Laos during COVID. His story is authentic. It's right there on the ground, and he speaks about how we're able to overcome, work through some historical animosity and rivalry that has occurred. And this is not unique just to the relationship that the U.S. and Laos had, which came out of the Vietnam War era. There's a lot of animosity that needs to be worked, but it's a good example, and he uses health security as an example of how we're able to build on a relationship. These types of things need to be repeated over and over throughout the region to be able to grow the improved security climate that we're seeking. And so I would commend that and all these others. I don't know, maybe I'll have a chance in some of the audience questions to pull on some of these other book chapters, but I'm really excited, as you might be able to tell, about the work that has been put forward here.
Thank you. And I know Lami and I have a few more questions, but we'll keep them for coffee or dinner. Something.
You're here in my office all the time. We'll just pick this up later.
I'd like to basically turn to our viewers' questions, some of which came beforehand.
Yeah.
And we have a little bit of time to do that. So if I may, I'll launch off with the first question, which is essentially, it's on Indo-Pacific security challenges. Question is, what are the most pressing security challenges shaping the Indo-Pacific, and how are regional actors responding?
So I respect that question. It feels a bit like maybe I should really narrow it down and put my thumb on this one issue or this other issue. I think
if it chose top three.
No. I was heading over to I was on an airplane flying over to the Chief of Defense Conference's CHOD conference and sometimes you need a little bit of time to think. Because I had been wrestling with how to frame all of this. And there and in the conference and back and forth on the flight, it really sunk into me that I wanted to speak about this, these forces that are really propelling the insecurity here in the region. And so I did, and I talk about the disruptions, the divisions, and the competition. And while we really get after that, is really some true challenges, and without a doubt, great power competition seems to take the air out of the room when we're talking about these things. I think I wanted, beyond all of that, I really wanted people to realize that the big issue here is that states have agency, that they are not just actors to be acted upon, but rather they need to be proactive in their approaches. And some of that manifests in various actions that states may take individually, and often a lot in what they will do collectively. We spent a lot of time, even in the introductory chapter, in finding security in the Indo-Pacific. We're laying out what we mean by this comprehensive security cooperation and why it is important to getting after this. And so rather than putting a finger down and saying, you know, the one big problem is fill in the blank, I want to put down and say the one real solution is to understanding that states have agency and they must act. And so hopefully that narrows down, because it's been asked a couple of times, what am I really getting after here? And I think that's what I'm really getting after.
Okay.
Thanks, James.
Our second question is about ASEAN's role in security. So what role does ASEAN play in shaping Indo-Pacific security, and how effective is it in establishing a comprehensive security framework?
Yeah. This question gets asked us, I think, often here at the college, right? Fellows ask this type of question. ASEAN it was initiated, it was formed in 1967. So we're kind of getting close to its 60th anniversary. And it is an institution which has brought about significant value in its convening power. It is even today, it is addressing, whether it's through the ASEAN Regional Forum or the ADMM Plus, the ASEAN Defense Minister Meeting Plus, as they're working some really important issues: countering terrorism, maritime security, et cetera, crisis management, really important issues. But, and I could be even more, effusive about all the good things that it is doing, and it really is. And we would not want to imagine the region without ASEAN. But I think, Scott McDonald in his chapter, for example, really brings out it can do more and it needs to do more. An example of this month here, we're now acknowledging the 4th year struggle in Myanmar. Really harrowing incident, security issues happening there in the environment that are affecting real people. And one would maybe rightly note that ASEAN has been a little ineffective in addressing that type of issue. One may say that, well, we haven't had greater outbreaks of war, and there have been those. But I think this goes to the point that whether we're thinking about great power competition and is it going to lose its way with great elephants moving around, as it were, or whether it's ineffectual approach towards addressing real hard conflicts in their region, it needs to do so much more. It needs to drive the discussions. And this is going to be tough because it is consensus based. And so, in brief, I think I would foot stomp Scott McDonald's book on his recommendations on how ASEAN can do more, because it needs to do more. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, James. And I'll move to another question, which is not surprising. It's commonly asked, even when we have fellows come with courses. And this has to do with China's military modernization. So the question is, how does China's military modernization, rapid military modernization, how does that impact regional stability? And how are countries in the Indo-Pacific adapting to this shift?
Yeah, no, the truth of the matter is, it is having significant impact on how states are acting at the individual level or the regional level. At least five of the chapters really got after some of this. And it's more than just the military modernization. The military modernization manifests. Denny Roy wrote his chapter looking at China's expansionism in the South China Sea and its use of gray hulls and various things to really be able to, and building artificial islands and all this to be able to really push its agenda in this area very successfully. And this is causing other countries to respond. Yeah, recently in your chair, Jeannie Watson sat there and we spoke about what's happening in the Philippines. Elliot Fox wrote about China's revolution in reusable rocketry and how this is really having an impact on the evolution of space and how other countries are reacting to this. The Bill Winninger wrote about Chinese expansion of its nuclear arsenal and giving recommendations on what the United States needs to do about that. I mean, I'm thinking that back in 2023, we sat down, I think we spoke about this nuclear Indo-Pacific. And now we're these couple of years later, and it's only, grown from then. And so it's not just rapid military modernization, and it's these other areas as well. Srini Sitaraman spoke about this industrial policy and how states are trying to position to be able to address China's rise, and so looking at this offshore balancing, but also recognizing the agreements that need to happen in the midst of this, the agreements that need to happen with China. So short answer is the states are significantly reacting to a modernization of China's military and defense and so many other areas as well. Yeah, I think the book gets after that, and I think the readers will enjoy that angle.
Yeah, so our next question is about US-China dialogue and cooperation. We often talk about competition between the two countries, but not so much about dialogue and cooperation. So where do opportunities exist for dialogue and cooperation between two countries?
Yeah. Cooperation is essential, right? I mean, if even amongst in this competitors, the absence of dialogue is only going to worsen the situation. I immediately was thinking, not in this book, in the previous book, I submitted a chapter looking at where we were going with our relationship with North Korea, thinking about we were kind of at a fork, and we might go this way, we might go that way, and we would be better off if we had greater negotiations with North Korea, because we would like that future better than the one we're going to find ourselves in, the one we're in now. And so I often think back about how because I spent a lot of time writing on that, about then watching how it played out. The absence of communication almost assuredly is going to paint a more stark future than the one we probably want. And so the book lays out ways that we can really get after this type of cooperation. I had mentioned about the U.S.-Laos example about historical animosity, but that works in our relationship with China. Scott Hauger and his co-authors, Shui and Zhao, they wrote the chapter on Can Rivals Cooperate, looking at the environmental security aspect of this and saying there are really big security issues in the environmental security area. Can we cooperate? And so they pull on previous examples of where the U.S. and China had cooperated in also very tense and difficult time periods, and showed examples of how, yes, not only can we, but the circumstances is really severe, and we need to do it now as well. And so there are a number of these chapters like that that encourage the United States and others to dialogue, to negotiate, to cooperate, to find solutions that will create this better security we seek.
So James, again, going back to ASEAN and the United States, and going outside the theater, out of the Indo-Pacific to the EU, how does ASEAN's Indo-Pacific outlook align or probably clash with the US and EU strategies? And what does that mean for security in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, so I don't think I'm surprised about this question, because there's been this proliferation of Indo-Pacific strategies. I mean, Lami just gave an example from Korea and how Korea had put out its Indo-Pacific. And so this question then is asking, about the EU's strategy, the US's strategy. And then in 2019, I think it was, ASEAN put out its outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And so this is really a plan that looks at a cooperative approach towards addressing the issues that present itself in the Indo-Pacific, right? I think that the US's approach is different than the AOIP, as is the EU's. I mean, the US kind of frames the free and open Indo-Pacific through this great power competition, and how we're going to get after that as the main problem, as the pacing threat, as has been called. And the EU is looking, through these economic issues and the cooperation issues, but it is coming more, it is not taking the centric view that ASEAN is trying. And maybe that is because ASEAN is just square in the middle and is trying not to align heavily on one side or the other, but taking this multi-alignment approach, which we talk about quite a bit in the book as well, this pulling sideways, this refusal to align very strongly, though Korea's global strategic power really takes a very deliberate view on one side or the other. Most countries, you wrote about India and how it is reserving its autonomy and will work on with all different powers based on its own interest. And I think that the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific focuses much broader on this much more cooperative approach than the other ones do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So our last audience question for you. What emerging political or security trends will have the greatest impact on U.S. engagement in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in its relations with India?
Well, maybe I'll mention a couple things, and then Sham, you wrote an outstanding chapter on this. I'll give you a chance to comment a bit as well. Without a doubt, I think great power competition has drawn the United States closer to India and it is manifest in so many ways. One can argue that the construct of the Indo-Pacific is representative of that, right? If you take India out of the Indo-Pacific or divide, just the Asia-Pacific, it doesn't broaden and bring in this large democracy on the other edge to try to balance all of this. And so the entire construct itself looks to center India in this. But the United States also looks at trying to expand its security arrangements that are there, whether it's in some defense platforms and stuff that it may try to send. Of course, India has historically a strong relationship in defense relationship from Russia procuring systems there. With the 3-year war that's been going on in Ukraine, it's been consistently looking at trying to sever that or weaken that relationship. And so all of these different approaches that I think the United States takes towards India is trying to strengthen that relationship and weaken its relationship either with Russia or China. But Sean, maybe I'll give you the last word on that comment.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at emerging political or security trends, I think I would watch, and from the United States perspective, there's recognition that the region that they call South Asia is not just India. There are 7 other states there, and I think there's recognition that each of the states have to be dealt with on their own merit and not as an appendage to India. And right now, as we speak, the region is in turmoil.
Yeah.
If you look at Bangladesh, if you look at Pakistan, if you look at Afghanistan, Sri Lanka is just pulling itself up from the mess. Maldives is pulling itself up. And I think the real issue is going to be, India is great at building relationships across the oceans, but when it comes to its own backyard, and which is going to be very critical for the not longevity, but the prosperity or stability or security of the region. If it's not able to manage its backyard well, I see that as a very, I see that as a red flag.
I'm glad you foot stomped that. I know the question asked, kind of through the lens of our relationship with India, but you have been a strong voice of wisdom here over and over, reminding us that South Asia is so much more than just our relationship with India, and we need to be very mindful of that. And so thank you for foot stomping that again.
Well, thank you, James. And I think, we could go on, should we? But I know we have to wrap it up now. We'll wrap up this episode. So as we wrap up this episode of Dialogue, both Lami and I want to thank you. Thanks, James Minnick, for sharing your insights into this book, The Indo-Pacific Mosaic, Comprehensive Security Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And if after this, you're not going to read this book, I don't know what to say.
Well, thank you to our listeners for joining us today. We encourage you to read the Indo-Pacific Mosaic and continue engaging with these critical issues. And please join Dr. Minnick on February 14th for Frontlines of Economic Warfare. In this episode, he will interview Ms. Raquel Garbers, a leading defense policy strategist who shaped Canada's Our North, Strong and Free policy. On behalf of all of us at DK APCSS, thank you for being part of this important conversation. And until we meet again, aloha oi.
Mahalo.
As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.